Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Babbling Pastor Podcast. My name is Michael.
And I'm Rob. Welcome to another month of babbling.
Yes. From a cornfield, it looks like too. So
There actually is a cornfield over there. But if I show you the cornfield, the sun will actually probably harm my camera. But I do have some cozy Christmas bears for coffee this morning.
Bringing in the season early, yeah.
I'm really tired of being hot, so.
Yeah, that's coming from somebody that lives in North Dakota. My goodness. All right, so you guys on the first episode, which was a really quick primer, like super short episode that you saw last week, I talked about specifically that deconstruction is obviously a thing that's happened. So we have Christian publications coming out with books about deconstruction. We have Christian artists doing lives together about deconstruction. We have a lot of people within the Christian community, maybe you know of some of them that used to be Christian music artists or Christian authors or stuff like that are coming out online and saying, hey, I'm not a Christian anymore. So me and Rob got to talking about it, and we thought it would be interesting, as I mentioned last week, that we would go through kind of each of our stories, part one, part two, that sort of stuff, just to give you guys kind of a look, because I think oftentimes we hear those stories and we go, okay, so they all end bad, or they all end with people leaving the faith, I guess. So this episode is my part one of what that looks like. So as I described last week, and as you'll kind of see this week, I'm going to go through it, and then Rob's going to interrupt and interject with questions, kind of acting as you guys.
Kind of like this.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Interrupted them right there.
Asking questions for clarity.
Hopefully, when I do that later on, they'll have meaning or something behind it. So
hey, if it doesn't, at least it breaks up my babbling. So anyway, all right. So I've already described deconstruction last time, so you can go look at that episode if you want to look at it. Essentially, it's just breaking down the little parts of what you believe. So for me, and I know if you guys have been listening to this podcast all the way back from the beginning, you've already heard a little bit of what I'm about to say and talk about. But if you've been listening from the beginning too, God bless your soul. For me, you already know maybe that I grew up in church. So I remember, well, I don't remember, but I've been told that basically I was born and the next week I'm in church. And I can, for what memory I do have, attest to that. That's kind of true in the sense that I don't remember a time when I was little that I didn't go to church. Now, I can't say I remembered everything that was being said. I just remember we were there a lot. My mom and dad were always involved in leadership stuff, like on the board, cleaning the church, setting the VBSs. I mean, we were constantly there. In fact, we lived right next to the first church I ever went to. We literally had a road separating us, so we were there constantly. And I don't remember ever growing up, ever having a time until I was probably like 8 where I was like, oh, okay, so you're saying other people have other belief systems. And that was specifically during a VBS we had. I remember Ninja Turtles were real cool at the time. Stuff like, just a whole bunch of ninja stuff was really coming up. Ninja Turtles, a bunch of ninja movies. I can't remember what it was. There was a movie with at least 3 kids. The Three Ninjas. There you go. That was a very creative title.
Yeah.
That was out. I really like that movie. And so at a VBS project, they had us draw whatever we wanted on these birdhouses. So I drew the yin yang symbol, and I remember that. Oh my God. my VBS people had a fit, and I don't remember hardly anything about my childhood, to be honest with you, but I remember that was a big deal. And that was the first time that I can remember going, hold on a second. So this is part of a different religion. This is something some other people believe about a little bit of good being bad and a little bit of bad being like, what is that? And that was the first time I was ever introduced to anything different than Christianity. And even in like the mildest way, obviously that wasn't like some sort of introductory course, but I just remember thinking that was weird. And then obviously growing up, going to school, there was some other stuff that was interjected in elementary school, but nothing like overwhelming. So, and then getting to high school and hearing, that was probably the first time I ever really got, people around me or friends around me. So I guess I should make this a case. Me and Rob kind of grew up together in elementary school, and then junior high, I moved away. And then I remember going to high school in this totally different area. There was a bunch of Catholic schools there, some Protestant, obviously private schools, but in general, it was a lot of people were agnostic or atheist, ironically, even with all those churches. And I remember the people became friends with, because ironically, they were the most welcoming, were a bunch of atheists. And I remember them just presenting all these questions, like, how do you know God is real? Why do you go to church? And just presenting all of honestly, these philosophical arguments that I had never ever heard about before, and just wondering is there any validity to this, I guess, right? Like, I mean, I know I've went to church my whole life. Clearly I've been exposed to other religions at this point, and thinking a little bit like, okay, well, I don't know if at that point I was ever like, is God real? But it was definitely, is he the only one then? Because there's a lot of other stuff out here, clearly. And kind of looking into that a little bit. Now, at this point, I think it's very important to note that it's not like I think I was probably like most teenagers in the regard that I wasn't really reading my Bible a lot every day. I don't remember any sort of prayer I had other than, God, please help me pass this test, or the times that we were at camp, where it was like, fire and brimstone, and then I was repenting. Those were the only two times that I think I was ever really in prayer, quite a bit. And to kind of juxtapose those people, I would go every summer to camp, back to where we used to live, and that's where me and Rob stayed in contact through that, where I would hear all these messages about God being great and sin and salvation and that sort of thing. So there was these two kind of ideas in my mind. I don't want to really latch on to either one of them, other than the fact that at camp there was a whole lot of guilt that usually came down as just some sort of shame. So I would get saved every single year. But
at least for a few months, you would latch onto that. Really hard.
Exactly. I mean, it'd be a good week there where it was super solid, and then I'd go back and there'd be some sort of sin that looked a lot prettier, and then I'd do that for a little bit. But there wasn't anything I was really like firmly rooted in, unless it was in my face for a week. I guess there you go. That's how that was the depth of my spirituality. If you would get me for a solid week, I'd probably latch on to whatever you want to sell me. And that was sort of the complacency of what I had up until probably like junior high, where I got really interested in who God was, who Jesus was. I think that would be the time where I'd be like, where the Holy Spirit really kind of started in a I don't know if I want to call it a low grade way, because that was really weird wording, but my interest started going into scriptural things a little bit. And that's where I started really looking into going to college to be a youth pastor. Now, you would think at that point it'd be like, okay, well, you kind of picked a side, like, what you're looking at there. And I would say that's probably not, that's not the indication at all, because I remember skipping ahead, going to college a little bit, right? I remember getting into introductory theology classes and then presenting all of this thing about how the canon was made, how the creeds were made, what the early church looked like. I mean, the fragments that we had for manuscripts of the Bible. And that point, ironically, was the point where I really started questioning, okay, what is this thing? Like, you guys are telling me you have like a piece this big of like, I forget even, like John or Mark, I forget which one it was, and I'm going, that's what you have. And that's what you're basing like the original stuff on. And I remember too, like one of my professors was talking about how the canon was formed. Specifically, there was a time where he was talking about the Trinity and about how like they took a vote, and that's how they decided like the legitimacy. Like all these bishops were there, and they were like, yes. And I was like, so the Trinity was decided on a vote. That's a bunch of people that you just told me that were fist fighting. They decided that on a vote, and
Sure.
that was
Business meetings, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like really trying to process through that, because I had grown up with this idea that it was it wasn't as messy as that, I guess is the word that I could use. Like, it was like, oh, all these people came together in unity, and they were wonderful, and they were in one accord, and they were hugging each other, and this is how we got the Bible.
Do you find, well, let me ask this first. Do you think that it would have been easier or different, in a good way, if you were somehow taught like from the get-go, like it's actually not as black and white, obvious, everybody, this is duh, why wouldn't you believe this? Do you think that would have helped if you had known, like back in the day, like as young as you could have understood any of it, that hey, there's actually a lot of folks who don't believe this, here's why, here's some of the, like, you think that would have helped?
Yeah, well, I can only assume, but my assumption is yes, in the regards that, like, that's why, like, even now I talk so much about, like, creeds and catechisms, and like, I've had those conversations. I mean, Haley's old enough to understand that now, and I've had those conversations with Haley, because, like, I would prefer it to come from me than the total stranger, right?
Yeah.
In regards to, like, yeah, this wasn't as clear as, like, some people make it sound. I've even had that conversation after a couple sermons we've had where it didn't mean to come off where it was like, oh, this is so simple. But, like, we've had that conversation on the way home, like, hey, this was the creed, or rather, this was the council that they actually talked about and decided from scripture that God was fully man and fully human. Like, that wasn't super easy. Like, that took months and years. So we've had those, and I don't know how much of a help it'll be. I hope it will be, because I for me, and I've had this conversation with somebody on their podcast not too long ago, where, like, I think for a lot of people, I can attest to that. Like, it was like a wave that hit me. Now, the only reason it didn't knock me over and completely, like, screw my faith up was because I was in an environment that was, one, I was able to ask questions in, but two, the people that were there were fully equipped to be able to answer my questions. Like, they had biblical study degrees. They knew I mean, they were very educated people. Whereas if all that information hits you in a place where it's just skeptical and nobody really, like, they want it to be wrong, then you're going to end up somewhere different. So totally, I think being exposed to that early on, with the idea that God still works through even that mess, like that, obviously that's how we got it. He can work through that chaos. I think would have been helpful for my brain. Plus, I would have been getting it in smaller doses, not all at once.
Sure.
Which I think, again, is why the churches in the past have had, like, you catechize your kids, right? That's one of the reasons, is to teach them what the scriptures say in a method of teaching where it's like it brings it on in questions and answers and back and forth. So yes, I think that would have helped quite a bit. And again, the only reason I think that I didn't kind of go off one end was because I was able, like, there wasn't a question too hard for them, right? Like, they knew it. There wasn't some question that some kid from Southern Indiana was going to ask that was going to blow them away. So
Yeah, you had me convinced that you believe that when you said that you talked to Haley about that now, because that's, to me, that's the kicker. Like, if because I do the same thing with our oldest now as well. He's getting, well, with both of them, but he's the one that's getting kind of to the age that he asks questions. He asked me about denominations the other day. He was like, why are there so many different kinds of Christians? You know what I mean? And so we had this conversation and about majors and minors and theology and some different things like that. But yeah, so cool.
yeah. So from there, I go on, and me and Kristin get married second year of college. And I mean, that honestly, at college is where I really get my love for theology, in the sense that, like, I didn't know those questions were even there to ask, really. And that's where I really start seeing that they're those questions have already been asked, and those questions have already have answers given for them, and you can wrestle with all of those. And so, at college, so me and Kristina get married, and then at college, there's this sort of real love for the Lord specifically, but also love for the word that comes all together in that. I would say that would have been like sophomore year, so a year before me and Kristina got married. Because I don't know, like, I tell people all the time, I don't know when I actually got saved, because I said a whole bunch of prayers when I was a kid. But I just know at college there was specifically a night where we had, like, they always had, like, a week where they didn't call it revival, but it was, I forget what they call it. It was something week, and they had a speaker come in and And I was so grabbed a hold of by the sense that I was not following God the way in which, you know, he commands, and my love for him was little at best. And I just got so grabbed a hold on that it was either freshman or sophomore year. And from that point on, I was like, which I thought was ironic because I was in college to be a youth pastor, but whatever. That's how he works sometimes. And and then we get married, we finish college, and we move back to, you know, where she lived before. And everything was going great. I mean, it was amazing. And at that point, I think it was all head knowledge, which is fine. But it was really a lot of head knowledge with like little things thrown in there where I had to kind of wrestle with a little bit more. And I had basically gone through a lot of what I would consider deconstruction in college in regards to actually like being forced. I don't know if I would have ever done it otherwise, but being forced to tear down theologies and intricate parts of what I believed, and kind of coming out really with more of a head knowledge on the other side. And then I remember Christina gets pregnant with Haley, which is awesome. And there's some complications there, which I'm not super concerned about because I'm just like, whatever, you know, it'll be fine. And then I remember the morning that Haley was born, like if I had to go and say, hey, what was the day that was like super like where you really had to tear down and test your faith? Haley's birth was like crazy traumatic in regards to Christina had a seizure, preeclampsia. Like they didn't know if either one of them were going to make it. Like everything was coming at me really fast. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot in that morning where I was like, is God real? Like what is going on? Why is all this falling apart? And I know it, like I'll talk about it more in part 2. But like how like I worked through all that and what kind of how silly I think those are in hindsight, those questions. But in that moment, all of my head knowledge was being tested against like everything that was happening about God's goodness, about his faithfulness, and going, okay, well, that doesn't like in this entirely traumatic moment where literally all my life could fall apart now. the people that, well, one person that I love, I would die for, and the other one that I've never even met yet could die. Like where are you? Like what, you know, where are you? Like what, all of the stuff I know, is any of this accurate? And again, we'll talk about that more in part 2. So that might be my part 1. I'll leave you hanging because in that moment was really the point, like where it was more like I talked about in college, it was more of a mental deconstruction of the intricacies of my faith. And then in that moment, it was really more of an emotional deconstruction of my faith. So I'll leave that at part 1, and you guys can pick up on that on part 2. So thanks for tuning in. I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. I guess a little bit of one.
Yeah. This is actually gonna. I'm excited that we're doing this because you're obviously in that world a whole lot more. I see headlines of famous people, DC Talk kind of stuff, you know, that people who've deconstructed, which is a fancy word, but and I have my own opinions about some of that, but I mean, you're in that world a lot more. So this is, for me, when you talk about the things that you've talked about already, there certainly have been many moments when I can identify with some of those experiences, and I know we'll get into that in my own thing. But this is interesting for me this is one of those months that you're definitely driving the train, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense, and because the whole deconstruction world it's a huge thing now. So I'm convinced that it's always been a huge thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, it just has a name now. But yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week, and we'll have Rob's part 1. So we'll leave you in suspense for a little bit. Yeah, there you go. What? Okay. Okay. Talk to you later.